She has recently graduated from the University of Western Australia with a PhD in Communication Studies. She teaches full-time at Universitas Ahmad Dahlan, and she worked at the ICRS and non-tenure lecturer at UIN Sunan Kalijaga before obtaining her PhD. So Mbak Elis enjoys capturing photos of nature and wildlife, and she has used her photographic expertise and enthusiasm to disaster visualization research. Her doctoral dissertation examined the photographic representation of the 2010 Mount Merapi eruption and the 2015 Sumatra Forest fire. Mbak Elis photographed Senator the Honorable Christopher Evans, Minister of Tertiary Education from Australia at 2012 East Asia Summit Education Ministerial Meeting in Indonesia. And also, she organized the 2014 Indonesia Unity in Diversity photo project for the Indonesian Embassy for the EU in Brussels. So without any further ado, please welcome Mbak Elis.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Salam sejahtera untuk semua. Thank you CRCS, ICRS for inviting me to share my research project on this great opportunity. Coming to ICRS and CRCS is like coming home. I feel like, yes, I'll do the presentation because I want to have a reunion with the friends and family at ICRS and CRCS. So here I am, a bit deg-degan, a bit nervous because I know that what is the forum is very prestigious forum of discussion. So I will present part of my research project, which later I also hope that I will get some feedback from you. So I have been introduced by Mbak Ica. Thank you, Mbak Ica.
Thank you.
So I'm basically a photographer, and my research interest is come from my personal reflections. At that time, in the 2010, Mbak Jim, Mbak Ayu, and me from CRCS, we went up to Mount Merapi eruptions to deliver the the donations, the food, and some of the necessary for the victims. And I actually saw, and I went there not only once, I went there for several times, and I know the things that happening there. But then the other day, I saw the media, the newspaper, how they reported the Mount Merapi eruptions. And I was quite disappointed because what I saw is the suffering, is the photograph of the suffering of the victims, the tears, the people, the destructions, and so forth. And I didn't see many photographs like what I saw in the area affected, like how people are doing the gotong royong, how they support each other, and how the volunteers are doing very hard. Things like that is not become the priority of the newspaper. So I'm wondering about how is the news photograph being produced from the photojournalists to the editors to the publication. So that's mainly my personal reflections that come to the topic of the visual representations of disaster. So my outline presentations is my introductions, why I am researching this topic, and then I will move to the research method and theoretical foundations. Then I will share about my findings of my research. And then I will also talk a bit about the visual framing of the blame discourse of the forest fires. And lastly, I will talk about the religious representations of the forest fires in the local newspaper Riau Pos. And at the end, I will have conclusions for my presentations. So this is the photograph of 2010 of the Merapi eruptions when I went to some places near the Mount Merapi, and apart from my personal reflections, I also learn about the newsworthiness of the disaster. Why are disaster attract many newspaper? Why are when disaster happen? Why there are a lot of media cover the disaster? So it's part of the reason is because the disaster have a high newsworthy value. Why they have high newsworthy value? Because it's all about people. It's all about the humanity. It's about how people got impact or affected by the disaster. So when disaster happen, we always ask where, when, what about the victims? Are there any people died? What about their house, their properties? So this kind of things always come in our mind, and we want to know from the media. So during the disaster, of course, media play a very important role. It's not only informing about the disaster, but the media also have some capacity to for the wider audience to tell about what specific actions that they need to do. Like for example, in the Mount Merapi cases, like we have what is it called? Stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. So at that time the media plays a significant role. Especially for the people who affected by the disaster. So I have 3 aims for this particular research. So first is to broaden understanding about how Indonesian journalists shape public perceptions of disaster response and management through image selections. And secondly, to explore how Indonesian news agencies, in this case is Riau Pos, visually represented the state involvement in disaster response. And the third one is to explore the influence of religious activities of the representations of forest fires in Riau Pos. The third one may be, very linked to ICRS and CRCS. So we'll see how the religious affect the representations of the forest fires in Riau. So actually, my PhD thesis examined 2 kinds of disaster. The one in Merapi, in natural disaster, and the other is the forest fire. But for these presentations, I will only focus on the case study of the forest fire in Sumatra. And I chose 2015 because 2015 is considered as the most catastrophic forest fires in Indonesia in the last 15 years. And I chose the local newspaper because of the proximity. As we know that in the concept of newsworthy value, that one of them is the proximity, in which Riau Pos as a local newspaper will have more publications than probably other newspaper in other places. So in 2015, 2.6 million hectares of land burned from June to October 2015. So and that way, the Indonesians announced the state of emergency because of that. And then there are 19 people died in 2015. But of course, in the forest fire, we are not only thinking about how many people died, but we also think how many people exposed by the pollutions, by the haze. So as reported by Kompas, there are approximately 500,000 people experience severe respiratory infections, and 43 million people were exposed to the smoke. So it's a big concern, especially from the perspective of the environmentalists. Even though even though the people who died not as big as probably in Mount Merapi, but the people who exposed by the haze is quite big. So as a research method, I use a semiotic. So a fun thing about doing research on because I'm a photographer and I'm doing research on disaster photograph that give me some insight, because I know from the perspective of the photographer, how I take the photograph, what angle that I will take, what kind of photograph which I consider the best represented the event. So this is just something that I really love working with the images. So for example, in the socio-semiotic theory, we can see the interpretations of the images actually can be seen first is from the distance. So whether or not the photograph is a close-up or the photograph is actually in the medium range or in the very wide range will give you a different meaning. Because semiotic representations is all things about meaning making. So the way that we interpret the images is also, it's also interesting to explore. And another way to interpret the images is by looking at the angle. As you probably know, that some people took the photograph from the eye level, so I took photograph here in the eye level, but then also some people will go down and take a photograph from the low angle. And then there are also some photographs that would take from the high angle. So it will give different meaning. For example, like the photograph which use the low angle. So we go down and then we take a photograph, and it's usually the photograph of, for example, the military, the rescuer, the men, to show that they are very powerful, to show that, they are very important. So that's the first one. And the second one, with the eye level, it means that the photographer and the object being photographed is in the same position. And what about the high angle? For example, like there is a victim that being carried out by people, and then we are going up and we get the photograph from the high angle. So it means that the person being photographed is less powerful. They are being carried out by the people. So this actually one way to analyze the images based on the socio-semiotic theory. So the sign of this study are the photograph of the 2015 of the Sumatra Forest fire published in Riau Pos. And the chosen photograph is best illustrate how various groups were represented in the coverage of the 2015 forest fire. And in this research, I consider the photograph in my analysis at time when more clarifications is helpful to the reader. We'll see later, when I saw some of the photograph that I analyzed. So as for the theoretical framework, I use representations, constructionist approach, and I also use some works of the Susan Sontag on the power of images. So this study is based on the representation theory. For example, how things don't mean, we construct meaning using representational system, concept, and sign. So this study is aligned with the constructionist approach in that disaster images are understood to have been photographed, selected, framed, and therefore constructed by the photojournalists and photo editors according to their international guideline, newsworthy value, and socio-cultural norms. So when you see the photograph in the newspaper, it has a long way, a long way. And even, I was imagining that a photojournalist going to the area, taking probably 100, 200 photographs, and he will choose like 20 photographs, send it to the editor, and then editor finally will choose one for the front page and maybe few, inside the newspaper. And the editor itself, there are like so many layers. One want to have these images, another want to have another images. So they have their own considerations why they want these images. So we'll see what kind of images that the newspaper finally published for their newspaper. So the photographer decide what to frame and what to leave out. Like when he or she finally choose the 20 photograph and leave out the 80 photograph. So the photographer has the capacity to do that. Or also which moment to capture. Because imagine a photographer going to the disaster area. There are just so many things happening there. And which moment that the photographer consider the best moment, which will represent it of the event. And yeah, the selections process is already influenced the narrative of the images. So as I use a constructionist approach, so in disaster reporting, the constructionist approach can be used to highlight who on what is dominant in scene by deciding who is being photographed in focus and who remain out of focus. It can also be used to see the trend of recurring themes or the published photograph. Imagine that you see some photograph from the disaster, and sometimes you will see that someone being in focus, but the other people, like the one in the back one, they probably out of focus, like blurry, right? Yeah, so this kind of things is also representations is in a matter of who is being represented, who are dominant in the representation. So if we have like many images, we'll see what kind of institution or what kind of images they are often represented. So we can see the dominant of the people being photographed. But we can also then question why are these people that often being represented? Why not the other people? So these are also some questions that we can raise, from the representation theory. So as Buikema and Twin suggested, representation is concerned with presence. So who are represented will be very important. Yeah, so the how and why behind the media depictions, for example, front lines in the forest fire carry significance. The one who is portrayed as dominant as well as those who are not in focus, so the relative importance of the subject. This is from Susan Sontag. When we study about images, Susan Sontag is like, what is it called? Like the mothers of the theory, like a very important figure in the image in the research on images. So according to Susan Sontag, published on her book on photography in 1977, so photographs are a particular type of communications that differ from text in that they attract more immediate attention than word. When we are looking of newspaper, or even when we are opening a website, for example, what capture our attention first is images, right? Not the text. So images has clearly have a type of communication, is attract the immediate attention. And then what can also be discussed in the scholarly research is that photographs are often dramatically staged to heighten emotional appeal. And then this raises the ethical concerns. For example, some of the photographs we found during the disaster, not only in the media, but we can probably have it in our WhatsApp group, some friends, some family, like sending the photograph of suffering of the victim. So this kind of photograph raise questions about the privacy of the victim itself. And Susan Sontag also say that photographs have been power to elicit expected viewer response, as well as shape attitude and behaviors. And lastly, photographs are not merely passive capture of the world, but can be active constructions with particular agenda. In addition to Sonntag, there are similar idea of some people working on the images. And for example, Griffin, photograph having potentially attention-grabbing content. And then also Gursel, people learn about the disaster from the news images. And also now the news photograph is not only functions to illustrate the news, but also a compelling factor to the reader. So this is happened like I have interviewed with a journalist in Riau Pos, and I asked a question: how important the images for the newspaper? And then someone said that the photographs are actually the selling point. We have to compete to other newspaper. If we don't have good photograph, then we are not ready for to competing with others. So this is clear how important the images for the newspaper. So after that, I want to move to my case study, to the forest fires. So first, I will give you a little background about the political economy of the Indonesian forest fires. So first is the global and local demand for palm oil. So Indonesia is actually the world's largest palm oil producer. So this is according to Parkey. And then many Malaysians and Singapore firms have invested in Indonesian palm oil plantations for commercial reasons. And then there is also a problem of the poor licensing by the Indonesian government for land conversions from forest to oil palm plantations. And there is also an issue related to the patronage network. Yeah. And it is interesting to find out a journal article that researching on the sale of the land in Riau province linked to the local government elections. So there were more land opening permits during the Pilkada. In Indonesia, the Indonesian Ministry of the Environment and Forestry, Kementerian Lingkungan Hidup dan Kehutanan, manage the forest fires in coordination with some organizations like the NPB, the National Disaster Mitigation Agency. And then in 2003, government official and community members from Manggala Agni, the fire commanders, to manage forest fires. There were 1,755 workers in 117 groups in 2013. And then in 2015, the Manggala Agni, the Indonesian military, police, Badan Penanggulangan Bencana Daerah, BKSDA, dan juga masyarakat peduli api, they form a task force, pasukan gabungan. We'll see later how the pasukan gabungan, the joint force, are represented in the forest fires. So after providing some background about the theoretical framework, in my analysis, I start with some questions. Who and how were the firefighter represented? And then how were male and female firefighter depicted? And how were the local authorities represented in the area of fires? And how was the blame of anger visually represented? And the last one is, how was religions used to affect representations? Unlike in Australia, where the bushfire is mainly because of the climates, but in Indonesia, there are many scholars that have been suggested that the forest fire are mainly the human fire, are the human-made disaster. So that's why there is also a blame of anger in the discussions of the forest fires. Okay. So here are the first images. I hope you can see clearly. Yeah. So the first images is a large group of the TNI, the Indonesian military, with only one host. Yeah. It showed that the firefighter equipment was very limited. And then forest fire as a national disaster was proclaimed in 8 September of 2015. And the question is, why TNI? Why TNI became the most represented in the forest fires? Why not police? Why not the other groups? So the first explanations is that because when the disaster become a national disaster, then the government, the president, will send thousands of military to the area when it's become the national disaster. So in the past, we can also see from the history of the TNI, of the Indonesian military, that they are the nationalist group which have capacity and the commitment to hold the country together in the time of crisis. Even I look at the, what is it called, the responsibility, the responsibility document, and one of them they are responsible to help the country during the disaster. So the media presented this because of the presence of the Indonesian military everywhere. So that's why it's become one of the most powerful group during the forest fires. So here is the TNI and task force. They work together. So here the way I read the image, here the way I read the image. So there are 10 men in the haze cover pitland, work as a team, ensuring that the hose spray water deep into the pit. And then the second one, that the men are positions in the top third of the photograph. The 2/3 of the photograph, the foreground, is focused on the scattered branches and trees. So using a low angle, the men contrast against the sky or smoke in a dynamic pose with the host, presenting a heroic image despite their smaller size. So even though they're in a small size, but we can see that they are projecting as a hero on these images. So what about this photograph? So this is actually very interesting. This is the photograph which covers 2/3 of the full page. So it is very big. So the Riau Pos give very big images to the Manggala Agni. And Manggala Agni is very well-known firefighters. They are very well trained and they are always, so before TNI coming to the area, the first responder, the Manggala Agni, was there to stop the fire. As you can see in reading images, I also look at like they wear helmet, they also have the boot here, and they also very serious working. And this is of the pitland, and the pitland it looks like there is no fire here, but actually the fire is under. So that's why it's try to push the water there. So firefighters are surrounded by smoke central to the pit fires. The headline, Sumatra dikepung asap, and the statistic, like there are more than 1,000 hotspots in 7 provinces. It's underscore the extensive haze, hotspot, and limited visibility. This is actually one of my favorite photographs when I see, and local government visiting the area, and the PLT, the acting governor, in a clean white attire, and then sprays water without smoke or firefighter gears. And he was likely there simply to broadcast a message of concern for the suffering of the local people who were exposed to the haze and contaminant pollution. Hey people, I'm here. I care for you. I'm trying to stop the fires along with my staff. I use a pristine white cloth, something like that. So actions like this shift to the focus of emergency personnel and the press away from the immediate concern. And going back to Sontag, she highlight the ethics of photo staging as well, that it could be misrepresenting event for political reasons. So we can see the Mangala Agni and like how they looks like and how this staging photograph of the government. But in the history, actually, in the press, Indonesians always look at the photograph or always interview the government. If they don't get the government statement, then it's probably not news yet. So it's also maybe become one of the explanations of the presence of the governments, of the governor and other official government. Very interesting and very new phenomenon in Indonesia, the female firefighters. As a comparisons in Merapi, in the front page, not inside, in the front page, there is no female who work as rescuer, or volunteer, There are many volunteers actually doing dapur umum di dapur umum memasak dan sebagainya, but not as someone with a powerful, because of course firefighter they are a hero, right? They are hero. They are brave. They are going to the affected area, to the fires. But we'll see how actually the media represented the female. So only 5% of Mangala Agni were women in 2018, and not all of them actually working in the affected area. Some of them are only at the office and working as the administrator. So the local government showcases female fighter to emphasize their integral role in combating forest fires. The rarity of female firefighter has caught media attention, illustrating the critical effect in which attractive women universally elevate brand perceptions, even in emergency services. So in Indonesia, we are quite familiar with the critical effect, even in the police itself. If you are a policewoman, you are attractive, you are beautiful, you will be loved. And many people will follow your Instagram, right? So this is a critical phenomenon. What about from the newsworthy value? From the newsworthy value itself, of course, it is rare. So because it is a rare phenomenon, it has a high newsworthy value. So if there is a female firefighter, they must, what is it called? They will be covered by the media because they have, something interesting. The presence of the female firefighter in Riau Pos is important as women are mostly depicted in domestic roles, which reflect Indonesian social expectations. Well, what about the comparisons? So male firefighters were represented in a way that show that they were capably performing tasks and handling the fires, which refer to their masculinity. This can be seen from the photo captions. For example, the male firefighter are said to work hard day and night, 24 jam. They are the backbone in the handling of the fires. On the other hand, in representing the female firefighters, the Riau Pos narrated how the fires could affect their skin and that they should take care of their skin and so forth. So we can see, even though there are female firefighter there, but the way the newspaper narrate is pretty much different. From there, then I want to move the photograph of the discourse of anger. The way that we show our anger in the media is pretty much different. So, for example, this university student has, what is it called? Wearing informal Indonesian sign, diasepin mulu tiap hari kayak ikan selai. Like smoke every day, just like smoke fish. So this implies that people should not be treated like smoke fish. The student is being informal and amusing to draw attention to the smoke pollution. So, so this one of the photograph that show the discourse of anger in a very different way. Yeah, this is very very clear that during the forest fire, when there is any problems, then the students will go for the street demonstrations, and this is under the Sumpah Melawan Asap, the oath against the smoke. As we can see, there are just so many people here, and there are no what is it called? There are only bendera ya. There are only Indonesian flag and Sumpah Melawan Asap. So there are not other flag that they bring. And in this image, there are many flags. And on the left side, if you see, there is the word bakar pembakar, which is quite clear. Yeah. So, so they urge the government to immediately solve the health disaster and to revoke the permit of the land burning companies in Pekanbaru. On the left side, protesters carry a poster saying "Bakar Pembakar," meaning "burn the burner." This is a strong statement which signified their anger that whoever burned the land and forest fire deserved to be burned. So threats were made against the perpetrators of the fires. So in the discourse of the angers, image of anti-hate protesters who had gathered to amplify the voice of the victims who had been affected by the toxic smoke that had enveloped the area for more than 3 months. So we can probably imagine if we go out and our neighbor burns something, and then there are some smoke, and we go through the area, we can imagine that we don't like it. What about people there that has like more than 3 months of of the pollution? So the activists didn't represent any specific university or display an organization's banner other than the Indonesian flag, which convey a sense of nationalist unity. So this is the first photograph that we saw. There is no flag other than the Indonesia. So the national message, it's become an important message that we can see from the photograph. The protester demanded that all segments of society come together to demand that all perpetrators of forest and land fire in Sumatra face legal consequences. And the student protests were also well circulated in the social media as well as in the online versions of Indonesian newspaper. So as stated in Riau Pos in the 23rd of June, President Jokowi stated that 99% of forest fires are caused by humans, whether intentional or due to negligence. As for arsonists, he said that law enforcement must be firm and uncompromising. So as reported by the Riau Pos, the Sumatra local government declared that they have done their utmost to manage forest and land fire. This was clear in how firefighter work day and night, they claim. Local officials expressed and quote these information in Riau Pos. From here, I want to move to the images of the religious activities that I mentioned earlier. So this is the first images in Riau Pos on the Istisqa prayer. So I argue that the Istisqa prayer is a way to construct an alternative interpretations of the disaster. As I mentioned earlier, the government stated that they have been working very hard. The military have been working day and night, 24 hours, not stopping, but the smoke is not, the smoke is still there. So then what they do is the government, from the governor level, gubernur, until maybe kelurahan, they instructed to do the Istisqa prayer. And we'll see here who are depicted in the prayers. We can see in the front, of course, men, because women are not allowed to be here. But it's actually the choice of the photographer, right? The photographer can also look at back and take a photograph of women if they want, if the women are worthy enough to be presented in the newspaper as part of the prayer. So we can see here who are represented. So there are again the TNI, and then there are also some people with white with baju koko, baju koko, and then these are in Indonesian context. Usually, the one who sit in the front are those who are important people. If you go to what is it called, to an event, to an important event, like in the front is always VIP people, right? So here we can see actually there are just so many people here represented in the prayer. So we can see baru tiba prajurit TNI langsung sholat istisqa. Yeah, even the the TNI are also have been represented during the Istisqa. During the Istisqa prayer. So quoted by Riau Pos on 8 September, Imam Ustadz Maududi urged the Muslim congregations to seek forgiveness, reflect on their actions, and turn to Allah. He questions whether repentance remains mere word, asserting is our repentance only in our mouth, by positioning both himself and the congregations or Jama'ah as a sinner responsible for his pollutions. He highlighted the need for collective repentance as part of the rain-seeking process. So we can see the Jokowi statement and also some of the scholars, they already highlighted that it's human-made disaster, it's human fires. But then, in this, there will be a constructions, the narrative that they built is that we all are sinners. It's because we didn't do the, tobat, bukan tobat nasuha. So this questions whether or not we really already bertobat atau belum. So the Istisqa prayer was used by the local authorities as an integral part of disaster management, and at the same time to defend the government, implying that they had done their best to manage the fires. So all groups participating in the Istisqa prayer, including from the Indonesian national military, who had just arrived in Riau, were represented as pious and thus worthy of public support in the fight against the blanketing populations. So that the last my image and last slide of my conclusion. I hope you are not get bored with my presentation. So here's the conclusion. So Riau Pos highlight the state's importance by depicting the security or TNI as the primary responder to the crisis. Image of local authorities in the burn area suggest state's appearance or media consumptions rather than active engagement in the ground assistance. So, and the third one is image of the street protests were mainly of students, and it showed them frequently in the role of mediating of the anger of those affected by the lack of enforcement and seeking justice or compensations for the victim. The image also has spread out by the student in the social media. The photograph indicate that the local religious authority used Istisqa prayer to downplay controversy and to provide alternative justifications for the hardship faced by the affected populations. So that's all my presentation. Thank you for listening to my presentations. And yeah, I would love to get some feedback from all of you, and especially from my respected ex-college, Pak Diti Sofyan and Bu Irma, which make me like feel very nervous to be speak in the front of the both two very well-known scholars at ICRS and CRCS. And also Mike, don't ask hard question, Mike, please. Yeah, thank you, Mbak Ica. That's all my presentation.
Thank you. Very amazing presentation. So first 3 questions or comments.
No question, good.
Okay, maybe to ignite the discussion of this afternoon, maybe the question came from me.
Okay, sorry, Mbak.
Okay, so I would like to, I'm kind of like curious about maybe like the relationship, or is there any like a power relation that's being constructed between, I think, the photographers and the editors or the newspaper side? Because of course, maybe like as a photographer, like let's say like when we take a pictures, we have like different meanings. I want these pictures to be conveyed in meanings like this to my audience, but when it comes to the newspapers, it probably change because it may have like this like conflict of interest with the editors and so on. So I think that's my first question. Maybe you can.
Thank you, Mbak Ica, for the questions. Yeah, about the power relations between photographers and editors. Yeah. Every media institutions, they have their own internal guidelines that become sort of like guideline, the do and don't. For example, like Kompas journalists, they already understand if they had specific images with all probably blood or in the conditions that very, what is it called, very suffer, then they said that it is impossible for the editor to publish. So every media has their own ethical guideline, and apart from that, actually there is also an internal ethical. Like for example, Arif, a Kompas journalist, like he stated that he didn't send the images of the dead body from the Aceh tsunami because of the of his belief, of his personal ethical concern. So again, there are many factors related to that, and even in the death of the editor itself, it will be the discussion of which photograph is being published is they will have like different kind of idea. So the one that really can convince that this is the right images is that the one. But mostly the reasons why photograph were published is first, it best represents the event. So that's the first one. And the second one, of course, as media, as commercial institutions, they also have the newsworthy value. They also have like the considerations. If this images is published, then this images is sellable, that they can be, what is it called, boost sales, or oplah in bahasa Indonesia for the media. So I hope that's answer your questions, Mbak Ica.
Yes, that answered my question, which followed to another question, if I may, just a bit, because this is like, the topic is about like forest fire, and we have this kind of big issue with those pollution in Jakarta. Do you think that this patterns in this study, in your study, is kind of like replicating the Jakarta pollutions? And I think the way that the government tried to cover or stage that it's not pollution, they keep like denying that it's because of this PLTU and so on. What do you think about that?
First is the way media represent the disaster will be again depend on the journalist itself. So the journalists in the local in Rio may have different perspective with the journalists in Jakarta, for example. But of course, like the journalists, like in the case of pollutions in Jakarta, for example, I think the journalists would have also a good understanding on whether or not, or what's the problem, what caused the pollutions, for example. And I guess that, I mean, it's clear that, in Rio, it's some of the staging photograph, it's really clear. But I didn't really see the photograph itself. The interview, they may have some of the government giving some explanations to that, but so far I didn't see, from my understanding, I didn't see the staging, the similar staging photograph as the one in Riau Pos.
Okay.
So that's probably my answer.
Okay, sure. Thank you so much for your answer.
Okay, Maija.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Yes.
Oh my
God. Oh my God.
So where is it?
Yes.
I think in general, and maybe it's just in recent years of the pandemic, when there's so much going on in terms of discussion about misinformation, disinformation, and hoax, that maybe my society in the US is more literate in terms of how photographers, how media outlets, how the government is staging photos for the purposes of creating a story, or developing their kind of forcing their perspective on an issue. And a couple things that I just think of have to do with migration. We have a picture of a migrant boy who died. I think he was a Syrian refugee, if I'm correct.
Alam Kurdi?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Then there's in the U.S. there's a picture of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's crying in front of a gate at a migrant center. But what's interesting with a lot of these pictures, because everything's digital now, a photographer doesn't just take one picture, but maybe hundreds. And so if you look at some of these pictures, especially if you look at the albums of photographers that they just put out on, Getty Images or AP, you see the different ways the picture is staged. And so what the media shows it is, this picture of her crying. But if you look at the picture from another angle, she's just crying in front of an empty parking lot. And so it really undermines, I guess, what the government is trying to push out there when there are these other sources of information, whether that's different perspectives of the picture or pictures taken by non-professional media. Pictures like taken by me and you, who have cameras and we can document. And so I know it's very, in Western media, there is a lot of manipulation. There's a lot of manipulation given the bias of the media, the bias of the government trying to push its agenda. Do you see that happening? And are you concerned by that happening in Indonesian press, Indonesian government, their stage photos and whatnot?
Sure. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Mike. Hard questions. How can I answer?
Not too hard.
Not too hard? Okay.
Just don't break the law.
So you will follow with the hardest questions? Yeah. So, well, thank you, Mike, for your questions. Actually, on my other case study on the 2010 Mon Merapi eruptions visual representations, I analyzed images of the suffering of the victims. I actually have discussion with Pak Diki earlier when I want to do this research. We come out with the word of the commodifications of misery, in which the newspaper tend to show or to sell the suffering of the victims, and that quite different, actually big difference compared to the other media in Japan, Australia, and in the United States. In Japan, for example, there will be no single possibility to show the victims of the disaster. In Australia, there is no possibility to show the close-up photograph of the woman in tears during the disaster. My concerns was like when I'm looking of the photograph, I was like thinking, if other people looking at how Indonesian media reported the disaster with all the suffering of the photograph, then they might say that, oh, this is Indonesia. When they are facing the disaster, like all people are like very weak, they're very passive, they are not doing nothing. So of course, the selection of the images will also can result in the misrepresentations of the disaster itself. The case with Alan Kurdi, the boys the boys that already died lying on the beach. It's become like a very powerful message that that the immigrant the immigrant has to be helped. That we all didn't hope that there will be more. Those boy Alan Kurdi died on the beach on their way to reach the safer place, and you are right, Mike, that with now even with the technology, I actually recently applied the Photoshop beta, and in the Photoshop beta, it just easily, very easy, like one click, you can change the background, the background of the images. The technology will given like very easy way to manipulate the images, but of course, with the different people taking photographs, the newspaper will have, for example, the national newspaper will have many layer editorial process. They will see whether this photograph can be published or not. If they cannot be published, why? If they can be published, why? But with the advance of the technology, and you are right, in the Getty image, for example, or Shutterstock, or there are many photo agency, they sell all the photograph. And a journalist told me one day that he didn't want to give the photograph of the suffering of the victims. He has so many, but he decided not to send it. But then he quite upset because the media then got the image by the image from Getty Image, So see that there are also different considerations between the photojournalist itself and the editor as the commercial one. With the non-journalist photograph, there are even actually also some journalists also sell the photograph to the Getty Image. I think it's quite common. Some has like very strict rule that they are not allowed to sell it, but some still, sell it. With this, there are no editorial things that people actually can see that. So in terms of the staging, I think in Indonesia there are also, during the disaster, the government always come to the disaster area, and there is also for example, there is also a problem that some victims feel that the government actually didn't do what they have promised during their visit to the affected area. So this also become a problem. The things now, I think the important thing is whether or not the media actually give more images to the hopes, not only selling the suffering itself. And in my thesis, I actually highlight the ethics of the disaster photograph in Indonesia. And this probably could be the reasons why it happened in Indonesia and not happening in several countries. And the main reasons is that in Indonesia, they only have a general rules of the guidance of the disaster reporting, but not focusing on the disaster images. So there is not any references in detail about the ethics of publishing disaster images. There are only a very general guideline that you are not supposed to, for example, publish what is it called? Gambar yang sadis, the sadistic photograph. But what kind of sadistic photograph? Some journalists say that it's photographed with the blood. But what about the victims of the Mount Merapi? And what about the victims of the forest fire that has like 3 months, more than 3 months, exposing to the pollution? So this is one of the reasons that I also suggested in my thesis to have the a very detailed guidelines of the disaster photograph published in Indonesia. So I hope it's answer your questions, Mike.
Yes, this is just a quick follow-up question.
Sure.
Did you do anything with Palu at all?
With Palu?
Yeah.
Unfortunately not. My master thesis was in Poso, but it's more about the media and conflict resolutions. Okay, thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay, Reza. Oh, Pak Diki. Okay, Reza.
Yeah, my name is Reza from JRCS. I just want to give how do you include some photos and not include other photos? What kind of photos do you not include in your studies? Because I think you don't include all, at least in this presentation, all the pictures depicting the disaster. Yeah, I just want to know how you select or not select the pictures. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Reza. Very good questions. Yeah. Yeah. In this presentation, it's yeah. Actually, in one of my slides, let's see. Yeah. So here, the chosen photo. Oh, sorry. Yeah, the chosen photograph best illustrate how various groups were represented in the coverage of the 2015 forest fires by Riau Pos. So my presentations is about the picture in power, state, media, and religious representation. So I basically choose the photograph that related to my topics. And there are, of course, a lot more photographs with the different topics. So the way I choose the photograph is that they represent the different groups, the different groups during the coverage based on the topics.
Yeah, I mean, there are other photos that also the disaster in other aspect of disaster.
Yeah, there is other photos. So, for example, if I see the two similar photos, I will only choose one. Yeah, so I consider how the various group represented in that. For example, the female fighters, the what is it called, the TNI, the Panggala Agni. So that I hope it's answered your questions, Mas Reza. Okay, thank you.
Okay, next, Pak Diki.
Thank you very much for your great presentation. I have three comments. One is many of the forests that are owned by the army, most notably Kopassus and Kalimantan and Sumatra. So the involvement in military makes sense because of that. Yeah, I don't know whether you sort of delved into that matter. It's not owned by the Kopassus or the army. At least concessionaires will probably be supported by. Right, so the involvement of the army might make sense in that way. Yeah. Secondly, your analysis on the Istisqa is really interesting. But you see, Istisqa is usually deployed when there are irregular weather patterns, when there are long droughts, for instance, and that's when the Istisqa becomes relevant. Yeah, to be held as a congregational prayer in a certain community. But irregular weather patterns and climate patterns are natural. What we are dealing here is forest fires, which are still largely caused because of the slash and burn technique by either the concessionaires and or the traditional peasants. Yeah. Meaning to say, what's the connection between the forest fires and the Istisqa, right? So you might want to be more critical in that sense, right? Because you didn't mention the typology of disasters, right? So there's natural disasters, there's human-induced disasters. So the forest fires here are mostly human-induced disasters. They're not natural disasters, right? So you might want to be more critical in terms of how to analyze the relevance and significance of the Istisqa prayer in that sense. Thirdly, you talk mostly about newspapers, Riau Pos and Kompas, and I'm still subscribing to Delta Rakyat. I've been subscribing to Delta Rakyat for the past 12 years, but I have not touched my newspaper for the past maybe 7 years or 8 years, meaning to say that there is obviously this decline in subscription, decline in the impact of traditional conventional media and how pictures are being used in newspapers and ISP. So what I wanted to ask you is, have you sort of thought about how your work would somehow be different if you were to look at the photos in social media? Yeah. With social media, we have what's called citizens journalists, meaning there are no media gatekeepers, there are no photo editors, there are no editor-in-chief, or people who would look over hundreds of pictures and having certain considerations for the code of conduct, photographics, blah, 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 to decide which pictures to put in, right? So I'm sure you've made your own observations about it, and like,
Thank you, Pak Diki, for great feedback of my presentation. So for the first one, this is something new for me, and I didn't had any reading on that, and so I didn't include. But I think I agree that it's look like if that happened, then that's another explanations on why they represents in the forest fires. The Istisqa prayer is very important. Yeah. I'm sorry that I didn't. I actually compare the natural disaster of Mount Merapi eruptions and the human-made disaster of the forest fires. But maybe I didn't. I didn't introduce that in the beginning. And Istisqa prayer is very interesting, and I agree with you, Pak Diki. Actually, on my reading, I had some, not all ulama actually agree with the Istisqa prayer. Like, for example, one ulama really didn't want to go for the Istisqa prayer because he said that probably the similar reason with what Pak Diki explained. So he really don't want to go to Istisqa prayer because he said that the forest fire is a human-made one. And then why we have to do the Istisqa prayer? You know, so that's the another reason, and I actually put it also in my thesis about this phenomenon. So yeah, and about the citizen journalism, yeah, of course, it's very interesting, and my reasons at that time to research on the photograph from the newspaper, because I believe that the newspaper has published many photographs and they already gone by the editing process. So I myself interested to see about the perjalanan foto bencana, like how the disaster photograph being produced by the photojournalists and the editors. With the citizen journalism now is very common. And it is very, what is it called? More recent phenomena. And I think it would be interesting also in the future, for example, to compare recently about the publications of disaster photograph in the newspaper and versus in the social media, for example. How are photographs who are going to many layers versus the photograph that, you know, everyone can capture it, everyone can share it without without any rules or guidelines. So yeah, thank you for the feedback.
Okay, any more comments or feedback? Okay, Mas Abdi and in the back. Okay. Yes.
Okay, thank you. I come from Sumatra, but I've been living in West Kalimantan for 10 years, and West Kalimantan is also experienced the similar thing with this karhutlah. I guess every year in West Kalimantan. So back then, for example, when student activists, usually they do the same thing like you present in the research, the demonstration against the government. They demand to stop the karhutlah or something. But when the government responded with the prayer, they actually still mad, but somehow it they cannot fight the prayer, right? So it like against the faith or something. So whatever, because this presentation is about picturing power in the disaster, I want to know which one in this event comes first. Is it the demonstration or the prayer? Is that this prayer is actually a response to the demonstration, or it is planned from the first time? Because it will be different, because if it is planned to calm the demonstration, well, I guess if the government is really bad, right? And I want to know how the people, the victims, and the demonstration act after they held the prayer event. Are they more calm, or it is really gain the trust for the demonstration or the society, or maybe they are just mumbling behind all of the quote-unquote nice publication from the media? Or do you know anything about it? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mbak Nancy. It's great to have you here. That you probably know better than me about the conditions about the karhutlah, and you can also see the student activists demonstrating there. So which one first? Is it the demonstrations or the Istisqa prayer? Yeah, as far as my understanding, it's demonstration first. And I didn't find any, what is it called, any connections between the demonstrations and the, what is it called, and the Istisqa prayer. So the Istisqa prayer that the government instructed is because it's already more than 3 months that the government tried to stop the fire, but it's still there. And I think that the what is it called, the student demonstration will not wait until 3 months, right? They will like do demonstrations like when they feel that it's already further, it's already like giving a suffering for the people, you know, in both in Sumatra and in Kalimantan. So yeah, I didn't see actually any whether or not then the student become, you know, more calm or not. So I didn't see that. Maybe one way to research this is maybe through the audience research. So yeah, I hope this answer your questions, Mbak Nancy. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, next question, Mas Abdi.
Thanks. I hope this is a common question. So I will ask about we talk much about the subject being photographed rather than subject looking at photograph. And I want to ask you this. Although natural media or press still plays a significant role in delivering or setting the stage, along the rise and the use of social media, nowadays we could see the shifting portrait, right? Now people or local or maybe we call it homeless media could also set the stage. We could not having many suffer layer by layer editorial stage and they just post it. That in many cases, the post by the people, by this homeless media, touch the trending topic and even adopted by the national media. And then the problem arises when this kind of disaster become a political commodity. And through this disinformation, and we also suffered in this political year twice, there is a cut and paste, we join, reform, and we take 3 frames again, actually 2 or 3 frames that it's not having connection, but we like a tailor it into one frame, I think. So this kind of spin of misrepresentations become a new memory for many people, even for the people who never suffered the Karhutla, even never suffered disaster. So if I may say, we could call it mediated memory now. The memory that actually we get through media, not we suffer or we experience it. So my question is, to what extent the autonomy of the readers, the autonomy of reader mediated to decipher the message, to decode the message, to understand the message, or in my language you use the word, his people is more literate than our people. So I ask about that. I mean, like, so in communication, usually we have one communications technology. So we have the use and verification approach that audience is not basic and even record is very. Thank you very much.
This is the hardest question, actually. Yeah, thank you, Mas, for your questions. You mentioned about subject being photographed. So actually, subject being photographed here, meaning that anyone that become a subject of the photographer. So whether or not they are looking at the camera or not, and this is also actually in the socio-semiotic theory. If someone being photographed and someone see you or see the photographer, then it means that he or she wants something from you. But if he didn't look at the camera, then there is less engagement between the photographer and someone being photographed. So that the just a little clarifications of that. And yeah, as you mentioned, that there is now a shift paradigm, and there is also, like you mentioned, about the audience is not passive. Yeah. So now it's pretty much complex issue. Imagine if I want to get the photograph of Mbah Marijan died. I didn't see any in newspaper. Newspaper somehow has their own ethical considerations for not publishing the image of the dead body of Mbah Marijan. But if you Googling it, you can find it very easy, the images, Yeah. Even though now is there are like people that more literate and people that are more active, but there are also, imagine if not academician, if even like maybe back to the people who don't have what is it called, any good educations, and they just receive the images that maybe it's a hoax, it's maybe like photograph or video of a few years ago, and then it's just descent, and they will just believe it, that and then they become like they hate that, oh wow, there's some images of Muslims being, by other, for example, or this is the images of how a community affected disaster. Yeah. So to maybe for some academician, yes, we are more literate. For some community that has internet or technology literate, yeah. But what about the other? So there are still many people outside there who are still not literate regarding this, and the photograph, like it's very easy tools, to be misrepresented, if because it's immediate attractive, right? So we can see that, for those it's just easy. So yeah, it's quite complex, Mas, and what else? Did I answer your question? Is there any?
Like, do we need the meaning requirement for the people to understand the picture? I mean, like, in political years, we know that many professors, many doctors, academia fall into the misrepresentation through photo. Like, yeah, we educated, but that we also fall into that.
Yeah, thank you. So basically, the general one is always to like to check and recheck whether the photograph is actually hoax or not, whether it's actually recently or not. And now I think we have Google Image. We have Google Image, when actually we can check the photograph through the Google Image. Then it will show whether it's the photographer several years ago or photographer, from other places. One way to understand the images, I think, is going through the context itself, because photograph is always come with the context. So even the photograph, for example, with the Istisqa prayer is also related to the context of Riau as a place where, many people were considered as like strong Islamic practices there. So yeah, I don't think that there is any single tips to how we all can understand exactly the images, but through the theory of representations and constructionist approach, that the photograph is being constructed. So that's the main understanding, that the photograph there is not like suddenly the photograph is come, there, but it goes through the process of the photographer, editor, and so on. I hope it's answered your question, Mas. Yeah? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I think that's the real pamungkas question for this session. So please give applause for Mbak Elis for amazing presentation today. So I think today's discussion could inspire us to be more critical with media in anywhere, whether it's offline or online social media. So thank you so much, Mbak Elis, for coming here and presenting your studies. It's very interesting. And thank you so much, guys, for attending this Wednesday forum. So we're going to see you next week. Yeah. Yes.
From Boston University.
Wow.
Oh, from Boston University? Okay. So you don't want to miss that one. So see you next week. And do we have certificates? Yes. Ibu. Mungkin Pak Diki boleh berkenan untuk memberikan sertifikat kepada Mbak Elis.
Aduh.
Ada dua. Kayaknya yang ini dulu aja Pak untuk yang di dokumentasinya. Ya.
Di foto nih? Fotonya dari angle mana nih?
Angle-nya dari bawah.
Biar kelihatan powerful.
Biar powerful kan, picturing power.
Ayo Mbak, menarik Pak.
Ayo.
Terima kasih Pak Diki.
Terima kasih ya Mbak Elis. Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah.